Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. I remember a time when selling software to Indian SMBs was considered an anathema. There were few customers as demanding and challenging to work with. But of late, we're seeing a whole Build for Bharat movement where plenty of startups are trying to help these businesses digitize and access innovation. My guest today is Rahul Raj, who is the co-founder and CEO of Flowbiz, that is building mobile-first solutions like accounting and bookkeeping for small and medium businesses. Flowbiz is growing rapidly. They, in fact, raised their Series A of $10 million from Elevation Capital quite recently. In this conversation, Rahul spoke about the opportunities and challenges of building for the SMB customer, how acquisition and monetization works, and some of the other nuances of operating in this market. This was a super fascinating conversation and should act as a great primer for anyone who is interested in the SMB market in India. So do stick around. Hey Rahul, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. Rahul, I guess a good place for us to begin with would be, the founding journey of Flowbiz. So take us through, what led you to starting Flowbiz and what your experience has been in that time.
Do you mind if I begin with a step earlier than that and actually begin the journey from Coinex itself?
Sure, for sure.
Great.
No problem.
So, we are three founders in the business. You're speaking with myself. I've got two other co-founders, Aditya and Rakesh. We all come from top-tier engineering colleges and product backgrounds. We didn't know each other from before, but have been startup enthusiasts since the university days. And we ended up at this common workplace in Bombay called Bizongo. That's a B2B procurement marketplace, also a startup by IT Delhi and IT Bombay guys. That is where we were leading different fronts and synergized to identify that there is scope to work together as founders. We were independently following the Bitcoin and blockchain space, and were investing in cryptos ourselves back then. This is late 2016. So when we identified that there was practically no exchange in the country, and there were just a couple of brokerage platforms that gave you Bitcoin and Ether access, we purchased our first Bitcoin and Ether back in 2016, transported them to global exchanges, and then realized that there is a whole world out there, and there is a lot of ecosystem development that's happening around exchanges. We were part of a lot of communities and groups, and that is how we identified that there is a way to build the exchange in the country also, and ended up setting up India's first cryptocurrency exchange called Coinex, which was launched in August 2017. It quickly became the largest as well. By December, we were doing more than $265 million trade volume. And it was a pretty massive business. We were looking forward to doing a lot of blockchain work. But because of the unfavorable regulatory climate back then, we ultimately had to take the call of shutting that business down. And this is 2019 when we took that hard call. And we had the luxury to be able to take a step back and together with the team, really lay out the fintech landscape in India and analyzed and assessed different kinds of opportunities that we could go after, and ended up looking at the B2B and the SMB digitization opportunity that really felt like something that we could rally as a mission behind and dedicate the next few years of our life to building something credible in this space. That is how we ended up setting up Flowbiz.
That's awesome. I've always wondered actually, what is that process like, in terms of finding that idea to work on and then, dedicating perhaps the next 5, 10 years of your life to real hard 24/7 thinking about that problem and wanting to solve that problem. So what was that process like, taking it from, market to idea to company perhaps?
Sure. Uh, I have been fortunate along with my two co-founders to see that journey twice. And, from an idea to a product and then product market fit and then scaling that product up. And both of these journeys actually have been very different. In fact, a decentralized crypto blockchain world is a 180-degree flip compared to the SMB digitization for tier two middle income kind of small business owners in India. So that's a completely opposite kind of atmosphere, if you could term it like that. And the process has largely been different. When we were setting up Coinex, we were actually crypto traders ourselves, and we knew what the audience would want. we knew what we wanted from an exchange. We knew what kind of experience could be delightful to the other peers that we were interacting with on a daily basis in the crypto space. And it was pretty straightforward because we kept on building what we wanted. When it comes to how we are building Flowbiz, the flagship product is called My Billbook, actually. It's a simple to use billing and accounting product that is designed from the business owner's perspective. Now, in this journey, it has been largely no bias from our side and practically first principles thinking, because it's the first time that dedicated mobile first software is being designed for a largely offline audience that is coming online for the first time. So I can't go into the market with a product thesis that is coming from my biases, but does not really resonate with the target audience. So in fact, the process was that we spent about 6 months of 2019 looking at all of the opportunities and researching. And when we narrowed down the B2B focus, we spoke with as many people as possible, ranging from 1,000+ business owners to bankers, SMB consultants, let's just say your big four consulting firms, and all of the public and private reports that we could consume, and condensed all of that research into trying to identify what the recurring themes of pain points were like. And when we were able to identify all of that, we set out to build prototypes and test it out and really be totally iterative with the process. Because if the audience is coming online for the first time and they are not savvy to tech the way we would ideally want them to be, introduction or upgradation of any feature on the product can result into a massive distortion on the experience. And that is not something that we can contend with, or let's just say, be agreeable with. So we had to really be with the first principles throughout the journey. And once we were able to identify that the product market fit has been achieved and that people are really liking what we have been able to develop, then it was just a matter of scaling the product up and listening to the consumers all the time, so that we take out biases of all kinds from the equation and continue to build on the expectations of our audience.
Yeah, that's fascinating actually, because I mean, both approaches have their pros and cons, right? When you're building for yourself, and then when you're dispassionately building for a market, I suppose, right? I mean, do you notice those pros and cons as well? I guess with the previous journey, you were building for yourself, and in this case, you're building for someone else, where you have to sort of live in their shoes, but at the same time, you can revisit a lot of the convention through first principles thinking and so on. So what is like the key, 2 or 3 challenges or differences that you notice in both of these?
I actually wouldn't want to use the word pros and cons, because every business is set up differently, and the audience is different, the opportunity is different, the maturity of the market is different. So for example, when we were building for crypto, there was already an activated user base that was hungry for a platform like CoinEx, which was a completely KYC, multi-currency, open order book exchange. So people were hungry for a product like that. So when we released it, automatically had a queue to sign up. But in the market that we are operating today, there is going to be a certain effort to make the audience aware, educate them about the benefits of going digital with business, and really talk to them and get them familiarized and comfortable with the entire digital scope, and to be able to adapt to digital payments and the infrastructure like that, which is also a push that we are seeing from the governments and regulators as well in parallel. So I think, I won't really use pros and cons, but definitely there are a lot of differences when it comes to the two approaches that I mentioned. And building for this audience, to be honest with you, is, marginally more fulfilling, because you're catering to an audience that, would not fall in the upper middle class plus kind of bracket. And they are in the business, of providing goods and services to a large consumer base. And if you look at the small business sphere in India, they've largely been neglected for the last 3 decades plus, whether it's access to financial services, or whether that's dedicated software that could be built for them, whether that's just plain infrastructure like a cheap smartphone and a cheap mobile internet, which was not available, let's just say, up till 5 years ago. So I think that has really been the case with these small businesses. And then when you go out to build for this particular market category, you begin to identify that not being able to access services, or let's just say not being able to access dedicated products, really hinders growth. And crypto was something different. Crypto was for people to make more money. Crypto was people to get a gateway and access to decentralized ecosystem This is not the case here. People are building these businesses at the small scale for their livelihoods. Their families depend on that income that the business owner generates. If they are doing, let's just say, a 50 lakh rupees annual turnover, they are fighting hard to take that up to a 75 lakh rupees the next year. So that kind of an ecosystem, and to be able to build for that, is much more satisfying. So it's not building dispassionately, but instead building with much more empathy and much more patience, so that you really are able to solve pain points that impact millions of small businesses out there.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and Curefit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming. Yeah, that's a great answer, actually. I've said this before. Earlier, when the government or whoever insisted on formalization, there was no real incentive, right? I mean, you would get a bunch of babus behind your back, basically. But now digitization is like a key incentive for people to formalize, for businesses to formalize, and so on. When you talk to these folks about, digitization and so on, what is their typical attitude to software itself?
I would try to answer that a little differently, to be honest with you, because today the market or section of the market may be ready to adapt a product like that. The kind of product that we build and tend to build in future as well. The activated market may be in metropolitan setups, capital cities of the states that we have, and possibly some large tier 2 cities as of today. A lot of our users come from tier 2 towns, but a large part of the early adopters come from the places that I just mentioned. As of date, we have got north of 1.6 crore GST registered businesses, and that is growing rapidly. Our assumption is that, let's just say, in the next 5 to 7 years, we will see that number nearly double to 3.5 crore businesses who are going to be GST registered, with evolving regulatory framework and the need of being a little more formal. So I would say that this audience is going to get unlocked layer after layer, and that is why trying to identify and pinpoint where the current early adopter cohort would lie is going to be a key parameter for us to consider as we march on the journey to be able to deliver the right product to the right guy at the right time. And that is why, building for this audience, we also need to keep in mind that when people get mature enough to realize that the scale of the business dictates for them to go, a little more formal, that is a function of a lot of things. So, for example, one of the critical things that you might see is that second generation entrepreneurs would take over their family business, and they would much rather want to digitize them from the day one itself. Or let's just say somebody has already had a bad taste with the previous business, wrapped that up, and now trying to set up a new business, they would want to go digital from day one. With the e-invoicing kind of mandates from the government, it's already a natural push for businesses of a certain stature and maturity to adopt digital means for their business as part of compliance burdens. Or if it's just the need of the business itself to go digital because they are not able to manage the complexity on pen and paper anymore. So there can be n number of reasons, including, let's just say, access to technology and cheaper alternatives that otherwise historically has not been made available to them.
Right. What are some of the popular use cases that you're serving right now?
So as I said, our flagship product is called My Bill Book. It's essentially a simple to use billing and accounting application, but we built the product from certain core philosophies. One of those things that have been very strong learnings for us, has been that this audience, when they began to get familiarized with mobile interfaces, the first thing that they began to do was set up a WhatsApp account, set up a Facebook account. Because of the Google login on Android phones, which is the majority of the smartphone market today, People would access Google search and Play Store and all the apps there, and YouTube for consuming a lot of content. And then came the emergence of Bharat first kind of apps, so your share, chat, and the likes. So people already were consuming content on mobile. It was much better than, let's just say, having a radio, and it didn't matter if they had a TV or a dish TV connection or no. And with Jio, the cheap smartphone access got coupled with cheap mobile internet access. In fact, in India, our data rates are possibly the least two across the world. So I think that way the access to this technology enabled a lot of people to come online very quickly. We identified that a lot of the behavior on WhatsApp was already getting captured, and a lot of the businesses were already using WhatsApp for a bunch of activities like coordinating deliveries or sharing product images or negotiating prices or creating WhatsApp groups for like-minded businesses and stuff like that. We identified that you will not be able to drastically change their behavior. You would have to subtly complement their behavior. So, that was one of the core philosophies we stuck with. We also wanted to make sure that the product felt less like accounting and felt more like business productivity and digitization of day-to-day operations. We also got rid of all accounting jargon like a journal, voucher, entry, and all of the double entry terminology that you have with a typical desktop legacy system, and replaced them with business colloquial terms like sales, purchase, expense, payment in, payment out, which are terms that the business owner, no matter what level of education or maturity or prior technical know-how, would still be using in their day-to-day business. So because of all of that, and tried our attempt to automate a bunch of these things, resulted into a delightful, intuitive experience that we were able to deliver on a power-packed mobile app that we offer to the market. If you look at the scope of what business owners do on the product, they are able to generate sales, purchase, other types of vouchers on the product. They are able to, from the central invoicing activity, are able to automate inventory management and receivable payable management, or let's just say party management. The app also generates business critical reports, ranging from profit and loss or stock summary or GSTR reports. And we currently support north of 20 plus reports on the product right now. And these come in handy for effective decision making on the go, because the business owner himself is using the product. We operate on a freemium model, so it comes at a fraction of the cost, practically for free also for slightly smaller businesses who can leverage and access all of these features on their mobile app, on their mobile phone itself. So this is the scope of the product. And because of all of this getting wrapped into the mobile interface, it taps directly into the WhatsApp sharing capability, because if you create an invoice or if you download a report, that can directly get shared with your counterparty or team member through the WhatsApp integration itself. And we support multiple users. So as a business owner, if you want to give limited permissions and access to, let's just say, one of your staff members, you could do that pretty well from the app itself. And the staff member would be able to also use a differentiated interface of the same app on their phones.
Right. So let's take a step back and observe the Bharat user itself, right? I mean, I remember a time when it was almost an anathema to be able to sell to these guys. I mean, it was really frustrating, and especially selling intangibles, right? Like software or whatever, right? I mean, they can be very demanding customers and also pretty frugal as well, right? So, but you're starting to see a lot of interest in building for them, right? You could say maybe the Jio revolution kind of spurred this interest, and also the rise in compliance and GST and all of those things, making it so complicated to maintain things on pen and paper, and digitization rapidly evolving, right, and increasing. What are some things to keep in mind to for building for this audience itself? So if there's an entrepreneur listening, what should he or she keep in mind before they build for this audience? You mentioned complementing their existing behaviors like WhatsApp, for example, right? Simplifying terminologies and so on. Any other things that you could think of?
Absolutely. And I would not want to comment on the consumer like products, because that requires a different mindset altogether. So, products on the social media angle, or let's just say content angle, those kinds of products are going to be pure play consumer products. I would much rather want to comment on the business apps, or let's just say the SMB productivity apps that a large part of the MSMEs in the country would sooner or later gain access to or come online with. Now, apart from all of the stuff that I've already mentioned to you, A couple of other things that are supposed to be kept in mind is that it's imperative that you win their trust, because if your small business owner is not trusting the product or the brand or whatever offering you have, that is not going to generate the right kind of engagement or retention on the product as you would ideally expect as a product guy. And to be able to win their trust or confidence, it requires that you really step into their shoes and understand their psychology. What really impacts them? What are those things that are really pain points to them? Because we can come from our understanding, and we may have our own biases and experiences looking at software that we use day in, day out across multiple kinds of interfaces that may not be the actual pain points that they feel. For example, one of those things that we were able to learn is that when it comes to the hardcore banking products, you would actually be able to integrate banking as a service into certain interfaces. But if you try to go and sell them a bank, you would probably expect a little bit of reluctance, because to them, a banking institution is somebody that is regulated by the RBI, has a headquarter at Nariman Point in Bombay, and has a branch office 2 lanes down the street. And they would actually be able to go and meet somebody in person. So they typically tend to believe in the banking infrastructure that is already existing in the country. So you would really need to understand what matters to them. And apart from that, I think making onboarding extremely simple is going to be a key parameter here. If the onboarding is complicated, or let's just say the first experience of the product gets them overwhelmed, that is not going to fly with this type of audience that is coming online for the first time. Apart from this, there can be a couple of other things to chat about. We can briefly touch upon them, but there are certain things that people tend to chat about with a little bit of dissonance, and that comes from the point of view that is it really hard to sell to this audience? There is a huge spectrum of micro, small, and medium enterprises. At the top of the pyramid, you have got these medium and large enterprises with a turnover range of, let's just say, 15-20 crores plus. These are businesses with complex needs and capital that they already have, which can allow them to identify the needs in their business and deploy custom ERPs and Salesforce, Oracle, those kinds of implementations that solve for their pain points, because they are a business of that scale. And then you have got a long tail of micro retailers, like your typical mom and pop store, grocery store, mobile recharge outlet, a fruit and vegetable vendor. They are also the long tail of the micro retailers in the space. And they will have their own set of pain points, or let's just say expectation from software, which is definitely not going to be as complicated as the one that I just mentioned. And then you have got a belly of the market, the typical GST registered 50 lakh rupee turnover to, let's just say, 7 to 10 crore rupee turnover kind of bracket. That's typically where our audience falls, and that's also where we focus. Now, to be able to identify the right segment, to be able to pitch them the right kind of proposition, to build the right kind of interface, and to have a point of wisdom under your sleeve, that is basically you will be able to monetize this audience on two fronts only. If you're able to help them save time and cost, or if you're able to help them increase their business volume, or let's just say revenue. These are the only two things that a typical Indian small business owner would pay for. So if your product or offering doesn't offer any of these, then monetizing is going to be a little difficult. And you really need to keep in sight the monetization angle, because the market may be huge in volume, but if you're not able to extract revenue dollars, then it's going to be difficult for you to scale further and create a healthy flywheel.
Right. Yeah. A couple of things that I want to pick up on from what you mentioned. When we say MSMEs, I mean, in India, that can mean like almost, I don't know, some numbers say 25 million, some numbers say 60 million plus, right? I mean, and there's a huge sort of scope, and finding your cohort in that, as you mentioned, is like super important, I suppose, right? Because each of these will have different attributes. A person who owns a small factory may behave differently from the guy who owns a Kirana store versus someone else, right? So I guess that is an important point. And, with regards to monetization as well, which is something that I wanted to ask you about. Perhaps, I mean, you may have covered some of this already. You have a freemium model where you're offering things free to the customer, right? And experience the product, experience the value, and then decide to pay, right? So what is your experience in getting them to actually pay for this, right? I mean, are there any tips or tricks that you would suggest, over and above the couple that you mentioned, which is like find a way to reduce time and cost and also increase business volume? But aside from that, from a product thinking perspective, anything that would make it easier, more frictionless for people to, jump on the bandwagon and pay for your product?
Uh, I may not be the right person to comment on this immediately, simply because we are in that journey ourselves.
Right.
The unique situation that all of us are caught up right now in is the pandemic itself, and there have been massive disruptions. In fact, a large part of the previous year went under lockdowns. We got a little bit of a breather in the first 3 months of this year, but then the second surge hit us, and then we are back into lockdowns. So that way, even at our business, from the monetization point of view, it's fairly recent. And we are running a bunch of experiments on the pricing front to be able to identify what kind of paywall would work, what kind of feature set would go under the paid subscription plans, how to really design the subscription plans. For example, there are different models to SaaS monetization as well. And if you are putting out a SaaS monetization model that is complicated to understand in the first place, that is not going to click with this audience. It has to be fairly straightforward. It can be a monthly subscription, it could be an annual subscription, it could be, let's just say, flexible. But to be able to wrap it up in a way that is easily digestible by this audience is going to be one of those interesting design decisions that product guys will have to take, or let's just say business guys will have to take when they design the SaaS subscription models for their product. We are also running experiments to identify different kind of price points. And I think in a journey of any SaaS business, that is a continuous struggle. I think there is always this understanding of how far can we push the average revenue per user, or do we need to subsidize? How do we really bundle, let's just say, benefits or discounts and offers? How to really work out referral programs? All of these things are continuous. And if you look at even the larger businesses in food delivery space, or let's just say in the urban mobility space, a lot of these businesses still continue to experiment on that front. You would still see new offers coming up. You'd still see new referral programs coming up. You'd still see newer incentives for their collaborators and partners. And that is why I think that's a continuous process. In fact, when we were able to hit certain scale of the user base, is when actually we were in the position to be able to run these experiments at a significantly large data set, and to be able to couple our intuition and qualitative feedback from the users to the kind of data that we were generating on the product. So matching all of that up and really seeing through, slicing and dicing the information to draw insights. And in most cases, the data would suggest something, but unless you're able to speak to people and really listen to what they have to say, really capture that emotion, it's not going to be possible for you to really understand what is that value proposition that is clicking to the degree where people got the excitement, or let's just say confidence, to pick up their wallet and pay you. So I think those kinds of first principles thinkings, and really being able to identify and empathize with what kind of experiences while using the product your ideal customer goes through. In absence of that, it's not going to be able to be a little feasible to build a rapidly growing and scalable business.
Right. Something also that you mentioned that I thought was interesting is that you can't really sell them a bank, right? And I mean, you come from the crypto world, which is like DeFi and all of these things. I mean, with the level of disruption that's happening, right? FinTech, DeFi, at least that's going to happen. I don't know. I mean, what are some things that people missing about building trust, or like being able to attract these people with financial services and those kind of value propositions? Anything that you think is slightly off? Because I kind of when I talk to the community, I feel like they are so excited by the tech side of things that perhaps, I mean, they're not able to fully empathize with someone who has only recently maybe opened a bank account and he's like kind of formalized recently, or like just engaging with the financial system right now, right? So I don't know, perhaps, I mean, this could lead nowhere, but your comments.
See, the SMB space is just so volatile right now. There is just so much happening, and it's, you can imagine this to be the early stages of a growth spurt, where audience is getting a little more mature, access to technology and access to devices is getting more rampant. There is push from the government both in terms of digital compliance and digital payment adoption, and there is an inherent demand from the consumers to be able to make digital transactions. Uh, all of this coupled, or let's just say supercharged by the pandemic itself. Now everybody realizes that touching physical nodes and then being in physical proximity, that is going to be something of a nightmare moving forward for the entire world population after we emerge from this deadly pandemic victorious. So in a lot of these contexts, we will actually look at this black swan kind of event that can drastically change behavior. But when you talk about financial services, we must understand that for finance, I think people tend to look at models a lot. People tend to look at the technology a lot, but they miss out on the most fundamental aspect of what money means. What money means to these people is where you will be able to play to your strength. If you don't understand what they are looking for, what is it that they really want, you will not be able to design an interface or a product or a service, or let's just say a nuance in the type of financial products that can be designed that really resonates with them. It also would require a healthy support of the ecosystem, ranging from regulators, banks, payment players, and the fintechs, to jointly create a bunch of these think tanks and sandboxes where people could experiment with these offerings, so that we are able to iteratively come to the conclusion. Because you may go with a V1 to the audience, it may get completely rejected. Does that mean you stop developing V2? Obviously, you would go and take feedback and then be iterative in your process to arrive at the 10th version that then clicks with this audience. And then it will require certain market maturity, certain education and awareness. For example, a mutual fund Sahi Hai campaign is required simply because there were not enough people getting the trust into the mutual fund system, or let's just say being able to diversify their assets to create a better retirement plan or a better savings plan. So that kind of effort will have to be made from the industry in total. Now, the simple fact why I mentioned that a pure play banking to be sold to this audience, will come with its own challenges, is simply because my personal belief is that if you look at the banking infrastructure in different parts of the world, India is actually way ahead compared to counterparts. We have got a whole lot of development happening on the regulatory front and on the protocol front that is enabling a lot of the use cases that fintechs could leverage and build on top. So whether that's a eKYC or a digital Aadhaar kind of system, or that's a complete UPI kind of system, or the NPCI as an umbrella body that operates the other payment methods like IMPS, there are a lot of developments that have happened in recent years that don't really mandate for something like an open banking ecosystem that is getting very popular in the West. Because there you would be looking at standardizing a lot of these APIs, and that's required for the banks to do it. And instead of creating a protocol that opens up every bank account as a wallet, which is exactly what UPI has done, they are struggling, or let's just say working hard, to standardize APIs from all banks and putting them together into a API layer, or let's just say a consolidated API layer that fintechs could then leverage. Similarly, the account aggregator framework, or the Sahmati framework, or Bharat Bill Payment System framework, all of these things are protocol-led developments that are enabling wonderful use cases. So if you're able to leverage all of that development and wrap it up in an interface that directly attaches to a pain point that this audience is facing, then being able to deliver that offering is going to resonate with the audience much better than, let's just say, going and selling them a pure play banking ecosystem or a pure play banking infrastructure, because that they are already comfortable with. Everybody is cutting a check, everybody is using, let's just say, a mobile app on the bank. If not, they are very friendly with their branch manager and are happy to visit the branch once in a while to get their stuff done. When it's in only a slightly incremental value, but comes with the baggage of learning everything or opening a separate bank account altogether, that's a hindrance. And the approach should be to remove as many hindrances as possible, as early as possible, for a rapid adoption.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Great answer again. Let's switch back to Flowbiz again. How are you acquiring your customers, and how have you seen that change during COVID? Anything that you did especially to react to the pandemic as such?
In fact, we scaled during the pandemic. So a lot of the acquisition that we did for our users came through digital means. A lot of the digital channels ranging from Google, Facebook ads to affiliate marketing to doing a bunch of activities on SEO, ASO, the entire ecosystem. We try to do a bunch of things for effective acquisition. We also experimented with a bunch of things on the offline side, ranging from offline sales or distributor-led distribution, or looking at anchors that we could work with. So there is a whole iterative and evolving go-to-market strategy that we are working with and experimenting with. And the basic idea, in fact, it's not so much about acquisition, but much more about understanding who that audience is and where they really exist. Because if you are able to solve for these two things, then getting to them is only a means, right? You just need to find the way to get to them. And there can be several ways. All of the ways can be equally interesting and challenging, because you would have to work out unit economics depending on your business model. You would need to look at how much money you have in the bank and what is that ideal set of cohort sizes that you are looking at to be able to, let's just say, roll out the next batch of features that are under development. So it can directly attach to your business progress, business model, and the approach with which you are trying to build your business. But the key principle to understand for this audience, again, flows back to the same thing, which is, even before the product development process itself, must identify who that target audience is and who we are building for. If you're able to segment the large 70 million plus MSMEs that exist in the country, with a long tail of micro retailers and the large belly, and then a slightly smaller top of the pyramid, for example, if you're able to segment this audience properly, and there are just so many parameters, GST registered, not GST registered, whether that's a retail audience or a non-retail audience, whether that's particular vertical or particular vertical B, whether that exists in a geographical pocket in urban setup or rural setup, or let's just say a tier 3 setup, whether that exists in, let's just say, commercialized or industrialized states, or whether that exists in more populous states, but not with that kind of industrialization or commercialization degree. If you look at these kinds of parameters, you would be able to understand that there are just so many aspects of how you could look at differentiating this audience. And once you've been able to find that subset of this MSME space that appreciates what you have been able to build, you would just want to keep on finding ways to repeat that process and find more people who are similar in the construction with these demographic parameters that I just mentioned, and try to find them over and over again. And whatever channel works for you is the channel to go after, because practically speaking, and this is coming from the limited experience that we have had working on Flowbiz for the last 2 years odd, is that for the SMB space in India, there is hardly any blueprint. You are practically on your own. So you must find that way out. And I think the best way to do that is to be able to listen to your audience.
Right, right. Some of the market conditions and, in fact, the attributes really scale to even the Southeast Asian markets, right? I mean, even there too, I mean, the businesses are pretty similar. I think probably, I mean, the similar use cases also exist. So do you plan to scale to Southeast Asian markets at all at some point in your journey?
India is a 1.3 billion people country, and we are talking about 70 million MSMEs. I think, that is a great ambition to have, but till the time we haven't been able to solve for the domestic market and really push for a large portion of the, SMB space to go digital. And I'm not even kidding you, 80% odd of the entire small businesses in the country still operate on pen and paper. So if that is the large chunk of audience that exists today, and there are levels and layers of audience that is going to get online in the course of the next decade, I think there is a whole lot of development to do just for the Indian audience. But having said that, once we are able to capture a significant market share and be a significant player in the SMB space in India, and we feel that we have achieved, to a certain degree of satisfaction, what we set out to achieve with respect to our mission of accelerating small businesses in India, with their growth trajectory and helping them out through digitization and technology. If we feel that we are getting satisfied with some of the work that we have been able to do, I think that is the point where we'll begin to set out to look at other markets as well. But till that time appears, I think there is a whole lot of development to do just for our domestic market itself.
Right. Your website copy reads Atmanirbhar Vyapari Bane, right? And we're seeing this whole movement, build for Bharat movement, right? And
Right.
a large section of India's demographic is now being able to access products and services being brought to them by entrepreneurs like yourself.
Hmm.
So what does, Atmanirbhar Bharat mean to you as an entrepreneur?
See, this is a little sentimental or to me personally, because it can have so many dimensions. But one thing that I want to emphasize on is that we have got all the ingredients. It's just that we are not beginning to cook the dish. That is how I see this. We have got a young population. We have ample natural resources. We are one of the most thriving tech hubs across the world. We have got progressive kind of policies when it comes to fintech and digitization of businesses, and we are taking strides towards ease of doing business also. We are trying to create, let's just say from a GST perspective alone, we have been able to consolidate the entire broken tax regime in the country. So we are taking a lot of these things, and we're taking the right steps also. But one thing that we have been able to do well is to export our services industry. We are one of the largest services industry in the country. Can we not do the same thing with manufacturing and production as well? Because if we were able to do that, then the staggering numbers that you see, which is about 38% to GDP contribution, or let's just say about 44-45% of import export activity, or let's just say about 40-42% of the formal workforce employment, all of which is being contributed by the small business segment, that practically translates to nearly one half of this $3 trillion economy. So if we are not able to create that environment, ecosystem and infrastructure that promotes domestic manufacturing also, we are bound to face the same kind of shortages and challenges that we saw during the pandemic as well. Strengthening our supply chains, being lesser and lesser dependent on foreign countries for essential supplies. I think those kinds of things have to be a no-brainer. And how will you do that if you're not able to support these small businesses in the country for a comfortable domestic production ecosystem? So I think while we are doing great at services, and while we are a great tech hub and startup hub across the world, we must begin to think about the manufacturing and production output as well. And that cannot happen till the time we really focus our attention to the small businesses. So what it means personally to me when it comes to becoming an Atmanirbhar Bharat is to really, be self-reliant. But that doesn't mean that it leaves out of the equation the entire cooperation aspect of the, Vasudev Kutumbakam and the entire, global rapport that we share with so many countries. So I think it's as much about coordination, collaboration, as much it is about being self-reliant and to be able to focus on the stuff that we need to improve on. From a pure policy perspective, healthy citizens, educated citizens that have access to opportunity because there are developments happening in the positive direction, I think if we are able to solve only for the most basics, the Indian, mindset and the Indian population is determined and, let's just say confident enough or hardworking enough to really find the way to take this country to grand success. But it just needs a little bit of push early on. And that is exactly where we are at the stage.
Right, and I think that push is going to come from startups and innovation in general, right? Because
Right.
I think that's the way we're going to leapfrog through institutions. I feel, right, and you're absolutely right. We have everything going for us. I mean, it's just all of that coming together and becoming that flywheel
Right.
that we talk about in SaaS, right? Uh, you've been a serial entrepreneur now with Zyka and Coinex and now Flowbiz. I wonder what changes the second and third time you build a business.
uh, I think the more and more that you think about this, and the deeply you get invested into being an operator, uh, there is this feeling that you are able to create value, and you are able to deliver something that changes status quo. And that feeling alone is empowering enough, that creates the motivation to get up every day, and no matter what the circumstances may be, or no matter what kind of hardships may come our way, we need to sail through. Then there are I think this is a temperamental question also to a certain degree, because different entrepreneurs would react to situations differently. I can talk about my personal experience. when I joined IIT Kharagpur in my first year, obviously coming from a tier two town and then being able to crack the IIT JEE exam and joining a premier institute, the basic expectation is to land a good job. But fortunately for me, in my hostel, I came in contact with a couple of seniors who were trying to do startup back in college, and I was in my first year and they were in their third year. That is where my first exposure to tech business actually happened. And when that happened, I got interested enough and fortunate enough to end up being a member of the entrepreneurship cell of IIT KGP. I actually spent a couple of years, working for the cell of the campus, and spoke with a lot of professors, spoke with SRIC, spoke with the MSME ministry, and a lot of things that were happening as programs, and spoke with a bunch of entrepreneurs who were trying to build either technological innovations, or they were trying to, let's just say, build service businesses and stuff like that while they were in college. That was a good exposure to have early on. And then when I exited the ESL of the college, that was in my third year, I set up Kharagpur's first digital, food ordering service. It catered to 10,000 plus residents of the Kharagpur campus, and onboarded both restaurants that were and food joints that were inside the campus and outside the campus. In fact, my other two co-founders also come from similar backgrounds. They have had failed startups in the past themselves, ranging from university days to post-university days as well. So when I graduated, I ended up at InShots for a brief stint, and then I joined Bizongo. But these two were also startups. I never wanted to join a corporate. So when I began to wrap up the Zyka business, which was food delivery, and joined the company that I had to work for, both of them also happened to be startups, because the environment in a startup is very different. It's a lot of freedom, a lot of experimentation, a lot of room to do new work, and not a structured process everywhere, which leaves room for creating processes of your own. So that was the experience and upbringing, I would say, when it comes to graduating, and then after graduation, the kind of professional experience that we had. And then when we set up Coinex, everything has been a roller coaster since then. If you look at the pivots also, fiat to crypto, and then the RBI directive hit us, then crypto to crypto, then we pivoted to the SMB digitization opportunity after doing a lot of research. When we did that, we were hit with a pandemic. We scaled the product, but then we were hit with a second surge, and now here we are. Now, a lot of these, pivots that we have had to make, a lot of these adjustments that we have had to make, this has all been possible because of all the amazing people that you meet on the journey. So every day is a learning exercise, and one of the strongest feelings that I have is a feeling of gratitude that grows deeper and deeper every day, and that's for every stakeholder, primarily for the co-founders that I have, the investors who back us, the team that makes it possible to really be able to execute the mission and the roadmap that we have, and most importantly for the audience and the consumers themselves or the customers themselves. Because of them is why we exist. They have been able to find value in what we thought is going to be a valuable product, and they validated what we actually set out to build. And once that feeling hits you, you just continue to feel that energy to continue to build and create a small dent in whatever the universe looks like.
Amazing. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think you've had very comprehensive, well thought out answers all along the way. So it's but obvious that you've been a podcaster before and you understand this really well. So kudos to you on that. I thought a nice way to end this podcast would be to talk about some lessons that you've learned operating during COVID, and perhaps you could also talk about your plans for the future and how you how you plan to scale Flowbiz going forward.
I think scaling Flowbiz is a straightforward, stuff to chat about. There is just no other focus at the organization, and personally for the three founders also, apart from scaling the business. And scaling means on all fronts, right? Like acquiring new users more rapidly and at an efficiency of the acquisition cost. Scaling also means increasing the team bandwidth, adding more capabilities to the team, creating more dimensions of both the product and the business, and creating more skill sets and capabilities in the team itself. Scaling also means to be able to build a brand, for the product and the company. Scaling also means to continue to have processes that grow with the organization And scaling also means that you install processes, or let's just say atmosphere and ecosystem in the organization that helps your early people grow with the organization. That is why, let's just say, a developer could end up becoming an architect. So I think you'll have to lay out all of that. And we are dedicatedly focused on scaling up. There is just no other focus at the organization right now. And we will try to do everything possible, taking up lessons from all across the world and trying to digest them and adapt to a unique culture that we have at Flowbiz. And we'll continue to build on top from whatever learnings we have had. And there is going to be shortcomings on the way. There is going to be hiccups on the way. There is going to be roadblocks on the way. But to be able to navigate through them, and in coordination and accordance with all of the stakeholders that matter, that is going to be the only role that possibly as founders will play. While a lot of the development work and a lot of the achievement work that the company will do will probably be driven by the team itself. So I think that is how we are looking at the scalability and the focus of the business now. And as far as the learnings from COVID goes, I think this has been shared on social media so many times, and it resonates very well with me. This is the time to not look at what you don't have, but really be thankful for what you already have. And this hit home, to be honest with you, because you have got, let's just say, a product that is working, or a team that is sticking with you, or the investors that continue to back you, a team, a co-founding group that that continues to have the trust and confidence in each other. A lot of things could break, ranging from personal problems in people's lives to a lot of the sudden dynamic changes that can happen in the industry. But you would have to keep your calm and patience and a composure in how you are operating. The other thing that has been a very strong learning is that these are unpredictable events, and nobody can prepare for such events. The only thing that really keeps you going through is resilience, and resilience will come from practice. You will have to wake up every day, no matter what the situation is, and no matter how hard or how big the challenge is, you would want to break it down into surmountable pieces and try to make sure that if you break that complex problem into simpler problems to solve, you will be able to make progress. And progress is all that it takes. One day you will be able to cover up for the challenges that look very big at the early stages, but then can be broken down into simpler things to solve for. So I think resilience is the other thing that has been very strong learning. And I think the last one is going to be patience. To be able to build an enduring, lasting company, and that is sustainable also and scalable also, will require patience. Nothing of value is built overnight. It really takes effort. So from that point of view, patience is going to be particularly important if you want to build a large business. But it's going to be 100 times more important if you're going to build for Bharat. You are not just subtly complementing the behaviors. You are actually looking at that next decade where the behaviors will look drastically different than what it looks today. So you will have to be that navigator that helps this behavior evolve while never making it obvious that the behavior is changing. So that way you will really have to continue to be patient with this audience, and patience will give you that much coveted reward that comes with the success of building a large business.
Awesome. So gratitude, resilience, and then patience. Fantastic note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, Rahul, for being part of this conversation. Really, really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to chatting with you again very soon.
It was a pleasure for me too. Really, really glad to speak with you, and look forward to this coming out.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.